Dr. Dan Rusu has worked with violent offenders and researched how murderers construct their identity having taken another person's life. Dan Rusu, welcome to Crime Files Cold Cases. Dan, you're one of the few people, not just in Britain, but in Europe, that's conducted research with men who've committed murder, who are released back into the community as people who've taken another person's life. How did they go about reconstructing their identity?
The first 18 months of their release is incredibly important for their identity reconstruction. It's difficult. Technology's improved, people have moved on. Many times their own families have moved on. What happens is they have to make sense of a world which changed fundamentally since they were first imprisoned many years ago.
Were they ashamed of the fact that they had committed murder? You know, it's a pretty shocking thing to admit to, isn't it? I committed murder, I've served a life sentence. How did some of your participants strike you about that form of confession? What were they hoping to achieve?
The type of murder committed is important in this conversation. We have different sensibilities when it comes to murder. Some murders are more acceptable than others in the public opinion and in prison as well.
What are you meaning when you say there are some murders that are more acceptable than others?
Based on the cultural context that we refer to, some murders are seen as more acceptable than others. For example, people who've committed murder during a gang fight would not be as ashamed of what's happened when we compare them with people who've committed a murder because they wanted to feed their addiction, or when they have killed their wives or their girlfriends.
Or even their children?
Or even their children. They will try to negotiate a sense of acceptable identity or an ethical self. People who commit a domestic murder, or what we call now an intimate partner feminicide, will say that that was usually a crime of passion, that they've committed out of pure love, and it was just the moment they snapped. Of course, these discourses have to be challenged.
Why do people confess? Is confession meant to absolve the confessor of guilt?
One of the reasons some people who've committed murder might confess is to, again, to negotiate the sense of an ethical self. For example, I have found lifers to refer to the fact that they didn't want to drag the victims' families in a trial and therefore kind of say that they're compassionate in the end. Look, I'm a good person. I might have done something completely wrong. However, I'm not going to get their families through that, and therefore I've confessed to their benefit. You could interpret that as benefiting them.
I've sometimes characterized murderers that I've worked with as being silent and uncommunicative about the murders that they've committed. Did you find that this was a conscious strategy because that, in a sense, allowed them to feel part of society again?
I've been talking with these men continuously, as you know, over an extended period of time. I could see how their strategies have changed through the years. Initially, some of the men tried to be upfront. They tried to say, look, I've committed murder, and they were hoping that people will accept them that way. Sometimes it works, but usually it doesn't. There are some situations in our society where you can't get away from your past, no matter how much you try. Prisoners have to show a sense of remorse in order to go through the system and finally get released. That's not to say that some of the men don't feel remorse. The confession serves the perpetrator first and the society second.